Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jane. You're welcome to Jane by Design. Now, in this video, we'll be learning how to draft this beautiful, lovely dress. I saw this a while ago and I thought I should make the pattern before jumping into the sewing. If you're new here, you're welcome. Kindly subscribe. This is Jane by Design, and on this channel I upload pattern drafting, DIY, sewing tutorials, and lots more. So I have previously drafted this pattern on my channel. This is a basic bodice or full scale basic bodice. So for you to begin with for this dress, you need a full scale basic bodice pattern, of which I have drafted previously, but I'm just going to go over it again in this video. Now you can see at the top of my paper I have a straight line running there across. That is the shoulder line. Now from the shoulder line there, I will come down by 9.5 depending on what your measurement is. So I'm going to be placing my bust point. I'll be placing my under bust line. I'll place my waistline, and I'll also place my hip line. So right now I have marked out all of these points on my paper, and what I'm doing now is to connect all of the points together. So I've connected the line on my bust line. I'm down here on my under bust line, and I will come down to my waistline and also connect the points. So now after connecting the point on my waistline, I'm going to go down to also mark out my hip line. Yes, you will be needing your full body's measurement from your shoulder down to your hip. So that is what we are doing right now. Okay, so now I've gotten my waistline, so we are going to now go ahead and mark out a hip line. So for the hip line, I will be using 23 inch. This will be the length of the front bodice. So here I've marked out 23 inch on the hip line, and now I'm going to be connecting it as well with my straight ruler. So right here on my paper, I have all of my lines represented: my shoulder line, bust line, under bust line, waistline, and hip line. Please always remember that your pattern is on fold for the front. Now coming down to my bust line, I went up from my bust line by 1 inch, and I marked a line right there. So that new line is going to serve as my chest line. So going up to the shoulder line, I've marked half of my shoulder measurement. I placed a point on that line. Coming down to my chest line, I've also taken half of my shoulder line and I've placed it on my chest line. So I have these 2 points right now. So what I'll do is to connect these 2 points from my chest to touch the shoulder line, but when we get to 1 inch before the shoulder line, I'm going to stop right there at 1 inch, and that 1 inch is to create the slope for the shoulder. So here you can see that my line didn't get all the way up. It stopped at exactly 1 inch. Now I'm going to take my neck width and my neck depth. So for the neck width of this pattern, I'll be using 3.5 inch. And for my neck depth, I'll be using 3.25 inch. All right, so here I'm going to connect it to create the neckline of my pattern. So moving forward from that point, now I'm going to create the shoulder slope at the shoulder line to connect the 2 points together. Now you've gotten this. Now next up is to create the armhole. Now to do the armhole, I'm going to measure that straight line we have on our pattern, and you get the midpoint. Just find the midpoint of the line, indicating not a point right there, and when you've gotten the midpoint, you go in by half an inch. This is not constant, it's dependent on your body measurements. Now moving down to your chest line, you're going to be dividing your chest into 4. Yes, your bust circumference divided by 4. You place it on your chest line. Now you're going to be connecting these 3 points together from your chest line to touch your armhole and up to your shoulder slope at the top. And I'm using my armhole curve to do that. You can do freehand if you get the curves right. Okay, so now we've gotten the armhole. So next, what we're doing is to get the dart placement. So on my bust line, I'm going to take half of my bust span, that is your bust span, divided by 2, and that is what I've placed on my bust line, my under bust line, my waistline, and also on my hip line. So your nipple to nipple is the same thing as your bust point. So your bust point, your bust span is the same thing with your nipple to nipple. I hope we get it. Divide that by 2, and that is what you're going to place on your bust line, your under bust line, your waistline, and your hip line. Now you've gotten this point, so you can now go ahead and connect these 4 points together from your hip to touch your bust line. All right, so now we've gotten the straight line. Next, we're going to be opening up our dart right now. But before I open up my dart, I'm going to come to my underbust line and mark my underbust measurement. That is your underbust span, your underbust divided by 4. You place a mark at where the measurement is, and then coming down to the waist as well, your waist divided by 4, you place a mark where that is. Now on the waistline, we're going to be taking a dart of 1.5 inch, so we are going to be adding that to our waistline. And then on that line where we marked, I'm going to be opening up the dart legs by 0.75 inch on both sides on the waistline. I will do the same thing for my underbust line, but before I take the underbust dart, I'm going to be connecting from the waist to touch my chest line. So now I've created the side seam for the chest and the waistline. Now at the point where I marked my underbust measurement, you can see I still have a little bit of 1.5 inch excess on the underbust. Now I'm going to distribute it evenly at the underbust line, and then I'm going to be connecting from that point where I took a dart at the underbust to touch the waistline. So basically the same thing, but we're not going to be cutting this out. This is just so that the underbust is tightened. Now going up to the bust line, I'm going to come down by half an inch on my bust line, and from there I will go in by half an inch as well. Okay, from your bust line you come down by half an inch and you go in by half an inch. Now after that, I'm going to take my ruler and we are going to be connecting from the underbust to touch that's half an inch we went in, as though you are making a corset. You can see what we have right there. Okay, so this first part has been formed. Now we are going to move on to the second part. At this point, I decided to extend my dart legs. Not that I'm going to be cutting it out, but just for drafting sake, I'm going to just go ahead and extend it up like that. All right, so here now we've gotten that part. Now to get the second part of the curve, I'm going to measure what I have from my bust line to my under bust. Okay, so you just place your tape at your bust line and measure what you have. Right there I have 3.5. So from my bust point, I'm going to be adding half an inch to 3.5, and that will be 4 inch. So on my bust line, I have 4 inch right there. I've placed a mark at that point. Now I'm going to use my curve ruler again to connect from the under bust to touch that point I have stopping on my chest line. Now at this point, you can decide to take this line all the way up to your armhole, depending on what your style preference is and what you're going for exactly. So here I have that, and I'll also go ahead and place my bust side dart as well. So I've come down by 1 inch from my bust line and I've created my side dart. Always remember your side dart, except if your front bodies and your back bodies are of the same length, then you wouldn't really be needing your side dart. So here now, coming down to my hip line, I'm going to take a point at 4 inches, sorry. So from my hip line, I placed my tape at the hip line and I took a point at 4 inches. So this would be for the curve, that triangular shape you see in front of the pattern. So here I've connected with a straight line to indicate that. Now I'm going to go ahead and extend my dart legs as well. So what I've done here is to also mark out my bust span. The point where I have my bust span, I placed it on that line and I marked it all the way to the top. So now I've connected the dart legs from my bust line to touch that new line I've just marked. So at this point now you can go ahead and now bring down the dart legs from your waistline to touch our new extension at the bottom. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going ahead to redraw my dart legs and ensuring that it connects from that point to touch the waistline. I'll do this for the first dart leg, and we'll also do the same thing for the second dart leg. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm going to be cutting out the darts. Okay, this step is very optional. You can decide to do our normal darts for a basic bodies and just stop right there, but because I want to be cutting out the darts and joining the pieces together, that is why I extended it to the extension, the 4-inch extension we have below the hip line. Okay, so right here my darts, I have created all of my darts. Now I'm going to place my hip circumference on the hip line. So my hip circumference is 40 divided by 4. I've placed a mark there. Now you can see there's a dart running in between that hip line, so you measure that and then replace it back on the side right there. So that's what I've done here. Now I'm going to be connecting from my waist where we stopped previously down to touch the hip line. So you can see the side seam of my dress. It's coming out gradually, or rather the pattern is coming out gradually. So here I've connected from my waist to touch my hip line. Now what I will do now is to create that triangular shape that we see in front of our pattern. I'm going to use my pattern master to connect from the hip line to touch the 4-inch extension we have on our pattern. You can do a straight triangle at this point. It doesn't really matter as long as you have a triangle going on in front of your dress. Okay, so you can see after taking that point, that triangular shape, or rather that box shape in front of my pattern, the dart, there's kind of a dart at that point, but I don't want the dart to go all the way down, so I've decided to redraw my dart legs to stop at exactly where the curve stopped. Okay, so that's what I've done. I've cleaned off the dart all the way to the lower part, and I've redrawn the dart so it stopped at exactly where the curve I have on my pattern stopped. And this is it, guys. So basically the front panel is done, and here, that's it. So now what I'll do is to add my sewing allowances all around the pattern. At the bottom, I'm going to add 1/2 inch sewing allowance at that point. On my side, I'm going to be adding 0.75 inch on the side. On the armhole, I'll be adding 1/2 inch. On my shoulder line, I'll add 1/2 inch, and on my neckline, I'll be adding 1/2 inch as well. Right? Okay, guys. So here, after adding all of the sewing allowances on it, now we are going to start cutting out. So just look at the way that I'm going to be cutting out my pattern. It's going to be easy. It's simple, trust me. So just follow the steps. Now I'm going to first off start by cutting out the waist first. So here I've used my scissors to kind of cut out the waist. I separated the pattern into two so that we will not be confused. Now the lower part, I'm just going to set it aside, and then I'm going to keep cutting. So right now what I'll do, you can see that we have our side dart. At that point we need to extend the side dart legs all the way to touch the seam allowance at the side. So right now, to begin cutting, ensure that you always fold in your side darts whenever you are about to cut out your pattern. Now for me to be able to fold in my side dart, I've decided to open up the dart on the waistline so that it will be much more easier for us to close the side dart and then go ahead and continue cutting out this pattern. So here, after folding in the side dart, I'm going to go ahead and start cutting. So just look at the way I'm cutting my pattern, and you can see that it's easy and simple. While cutting out, I also went ahead to slash that line I have on my underbust to touch the shoulder line, so that we have enough gathering. And I've also cut out the dart at the lower part and at the middle part of this pattern. So I have just one piece for the lower part and for the middle part after joining them together and after cutting out the dart. So moving on to the back. For the back, I'm going to fast forward this video a little bit because it's just going to be redrafting what we have drafted for the front. So the back is just the same thing as the front. The major difference between the back and the front is that the back doesn't have an underbust aligned to it. So here I am drafting my back. I have the neckline, I have my bust line, the waist and the hip line, and now I'm going to be creating the dart at the waistline to connect to the bust line. And for the extension, I remember that I used 4 inches, so I will just go ahead and extend the dart legs towards the bottom part. And here we are, I've done that. Now I'm going to create the side seam for my pattern for the back. Now, because I extended my dart legs towards the 4-inch extension below the hip line, I also went ahead to extend my dart legs to that point. Then you just go ahead and mark out the curved. Like I said, it's the same thing we have for the front. If you watched how I drafted the front, you will see that they are similar. So after we've gotten all the darts, I will go ahead and do the zipper tightening so we don't have a bulge at the back of our dress. And that is it, guys. Next, what you do is to add your sewing allowances all around it. You add half an inch sewing allowance at the side, or you can add 3/4 of an inch depending on what you're comfortable sewing on. So here I have added all of my sewing allowances. Now I will be cutting out this pattern. I started from the waist, I cut out my zipper line, I also cut out the sides, cut out the armhole, the shoulder line, and also the neckline. So ensure that you're cutting exactly on your sewing allowance. So on my bust line, I cut that into 2 as well, cut out the dart. I'm going to be joining that center piece together without the dart, and I'll do the same thing for the bottom of this back as well. I went ahead to cut it out. I also cut out the dart at that section. So at the end of the day, when I'm done joining the 2 pieces together, I will have just 1 piece for the yoke, the midsection, and the lower parts of my dress. So here it is, guys. After all of that, this is what the back panel looks like. It has 1 piece for the yoke, the middle section, and also the lower part. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please give me a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment in the comment section. I'll see you guys. If you want to see a sewing tutorial of this pattern, let me know in the comment section. Thank you, and see you guys later.